If you're a parent caught in the chaos of youth sports, the pressure, the politics, the excitement, you're not alone. This is Be Valiant.
On this episode of Be Valiant, I'm excited. We're joined by Steve Borelli. Steve, I found reading some articles of his, and he is a journalist, longtime journalist from USA Today. In particular, his background, he's sports special editions editor at USA Today. He's had a long career at the company, overseeing special publications and sports-themed editions. He writes a weekly sports parenting column that's posted at USA Today, and they are, I have to tell you, fantastic articles, and this is what makes me so excited about having him on this show and talking through all these. On a personal basis, as we stay true to sports parents, he's a proud sports parent and coach. He's also known as Coach Steve to his USA Today readers, often writing from the dual viewpoint of a journalist and a dad, which makes this really fascinating. He earned an English degree from Georgetown University. I was always careful writing to him to make sure I didn't give him anything he was going to have to edit. And he's married and with two boys. In his personal life as a sports dad and youth coach, frequently informs his columns and his media contributions about coaching his boys. And I'm so glad to have him. Welcome, Steve, to Be Valiant.
Thanks, Todd. Happy to be here.
This is going to be fun for the next hour, so I'm really looking forward to it. So again, thank you so much. Let's start with really kind of, the basis of all this, the journalist, the coach, the dad. A lot of people know you as Coach Steve through USA Today. Can you give us a quick snapshot of the journey and of your kids and, as a sports parent and where they are today in their journey?
Yeah, I think what's fascinating about this is USA Today. The way my job worked is that I was editing weekly publications for USA Today, our sports weekly publication, and our monthly kind of previews of different sports. And so the way that schedule worked, I was able to, from the time my boys, who are now teenagers, late teenagers, or 5 or 6, I was able to really devote time to coaching their teams, like never thinking that this would be something I'd ever write about. It's just something that every dad, not every, but a lot of dads like to do, right? So my dad coached me at Little League. And so I started with baseball and soccer, which is what I played when I was younger. And I moved to kind of basketball and flag football. I'd say the bulk of the stuff I did was basketball and definitely baseball, which is my favorite sport. And it was just a fun journey. And then by the time they got to high school, they're now 17, I'm 18, actually, believe it or not, 18 and 15. I was able to USA Today came to me and said, this youth sports realm is something that's kind of untapped, sports parenting advice. So let's go after this. And would you like to be our columnist? And so that was like March 2023. And so I've pretty much been writing a weekly column, sometimes more than once a week, about this topic. And I think I've gotten a lot of interest because there are so many people like myself, like yourself, like other people that are out there who have younger kids who are going through this. And we're all it's sort of a work in progress, right? We're all trying to figure this out. No one has it figured out. But I think the more voices we get on this and the more we communicate with people about the process, I think the better it'll be for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, by the way, the purpose of Valiant Sports Society, that's why I love having you here, is really to get information to parents. That's the bottom line. How can we better educate them to empower them? And you cover so many topics that are along those lines. And at the end of the day, if we empower our parents on how they're going to guide their kids through this journey, the hope is that we'll have better mental and physical outcomes that'll come from all this. So, I'm really curious, and you started this in 2023 as this advocate. What kind of feedback have you been getting since? Because your stories are dead on, and as a parent who's been through the journey and done, I can't tell you how many of your articles I've read, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is totally what I went through. So what's the feedback been like?
I absolutely see what you're saying. And I've been through this. What's neat is I get a lot of personal anecdotes from people, and then those have turned into other stories. Like, for example, I've heard from a couple of sports officials. And then I wrote a story about kind of, the disrespect that sports officials, referees, and umpires get from spectators, parents, and hearing their voice, getting their voice into these stories. And I think when we're at these events, we sometimes get so caught up in our kids and who's winning and who's losing that we forget that everyone's a human being out there, the other coaches, the other kids, the umpires, the referees. So I think it's kind of been an effort where I've done work and it's sort of built up steam because people are interacting with me and they're communicating with me and they're giving me, fresh ideas to work with.
Yeah, and the officiating thing in particular, and we're not going to go too deep in this episode about it, but that article was fascinating as well, and especially considering we're seeing a decline in officials in youth sports, and it's because of how the parents are acting for the most part towards these officials. I mean, I think it almost happens monthly where we see stuff on Instagram and social feeds where officials are getting harassed and abused, and at the end of the day, it's forgotten that they're there for the kids and they're there to help this ecosystem thrive and grow and make sure these kids are having fun. But somehow that's all lost. But the point that I really wanted to make here is, the topics that you're touching on are such at the center of it all. And there's so many of them. Again, like I said in the beginning, there's so many things I'd love to dive into, but you manage to find the things that are really kind of there for everybody. And I hope everybody's finding these articles. I mean, I hope that, that information is making its way to sports parents that are in the thick of it today. All right, so let's talk about Coach Steve and Dad at home and your wife. You spent decades coaching them in all those sports. How did the experiences overlap? What you were writing about in your columns. Did you write about those experiences as well?
So I brought them. What I'm able to do is I'm able to bring in. I think the reason I've been able to connect is because other people have gone through what I've gone through, and I have like a perspective. I try not to put my own anecdotes in there. I mean, I put them in, but I try not to rely on them because obviously I'm just one person having one experience, and I try to focus on themes that are kind of a shared experience for everyone. So I might say, yes, this reminds me of something, but then I move on to sort of getting national perspectives from figures, coaches, sports officials, like I mentioned. The advantage of working for USA Today is I'm able to reach out to celebrities. Celebrities might be promoting something, and I can do an interview with them, and then I can talk to them, and they really have been very eager to talk about their sports backgrounds, how they were raised. A lot of these celebrities have great stories of supportive parents who weren't too pushy and got them to where they needed to be. Kind of gave them a lot of autonomy. And I think that helps. And I think also just, giving kids free reign to do what they want. I think that's a really important thing. But I haven't really brought my own kids too much into it, just here and there.
So separate from your writing, what's your sports parenting, you and your wife? What's that been like? What has that experience been for you guys? What do you guys tend to focus on strategically with your boys?
Well, I think it's I laugh because I think like everyone just kind of, you go through it. It's kind of like a work in progress. Like it's never perfect, right? And you start off. I think everyone starts off. You throw them out there on that little league field, and they're running the first base, and you want to make sure everything is perfect. And you're coaching, and you're kind of like, guys, don't all jump on the ball. Throw the ball to first base. But I think that's part of the fun of like being a kid, right? And then when you take a step back and you watch them progress, and you let them make decisions and evolve on the field, I think that's the best way to do it, right? So I think as we've gone on, we're not perfect. We've had our moments where we've gotten upset with them, probably too much, about something that might have happened. I think our best moments are when we've really learned to kind of let the experience come from them. If it's a game, obviously we know when it's a good game, we know when it's a bad game. Sometimes it's in between, and they get in the car, and I kind of just let the conversation go from what my sons want to say about it. And sometimes we talk about something else. Sometimes we talk about how we can do better, but that's only if they bring it up. I try to really adhere to the 24-hour rule and get into that a little bit later. But I think having it come from them is the most important thing, and always making sure that they want to be doing something, right? Like my younger son played football his freshman year of high school. He decided on his own not to play it. And so we're supportive of that as he pursues a baseball career that hopefully will end up in college, that sort of thing.
Yeah. The car ride, I wanted to ask you about that. So the car ride, were you always with the 24-hour rule? Did you always stay away? By the way, I made the mistake early on, and then I realized at some point, I don't know if I heard it from somebody or if it clicked, and I'm like, okay, this isn't a good idea, and I need to kind of back off. And what was the beginning of it like? Were you that way from the start?
Absolutely not. No, I don't think anybody is. I think anybody who says they are like that from the start is lying. I mean, obviously you put so much into it. I mean, I was just in the Little League World Series, and I was talking with the president up there of Little League, and he was saying that it's always the parents that have the tougher reactions when the kids lose these seemingly high stakes games at the Little League World Series. I mean, we're the ones that wear it much more than they do. So I think it's an important catch that every parent has to make at some point when you're driving home. And you're tempted to kind of say, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? But you have to think about their kids, they're trying hard. And let's take a step back and let's let them talk, and let's maybe there's some constructive criticism that comes later on when they're in a better state of mind. I think the biggest thing is making sure that the effort is there. And I've heard this from a lot of people. If the effort is there, you really can't criticize what they're doing.
We'll talk about this more as we get into your articles, but I have to bring this quote into play as you talk about this, because it is an evolution, right? And we don't know really what we're getting into. And when we spoke the first time, I told you, for me, it was, oh my gosh, 3 years into a club environment in soccer, I was like looking around going, what in the heck is going on here? What did I get myself into and my kids into, right? And so at that point, you're kind of forced to, you got to figure this out for the better for everybody, or else it's going to get bad really fast. But one of the articles, you brought up the Little League World Series. In your article, you spoke with Todd Frazier, which is an amazing article. And you open the article by saying, do you have youth sports figured out? And he replies, I think anybody that says they know what they're doing, they'd be lying to themselves. And this is coming from a guy who played in the major leagues, who was on the world stage in Little League when his team from New Jersey won the Little League World Series. And here's a parent who's gotten in the middle of it, and he doesn't understand, right? He's figuring it out, although there's a lot of good information in this article that we'll dive into. But again, this evolution of, where we are as parents and sports parents, and you took the dive into coaching a lot longer. I coached for a couple early years in soccer, but you took that dive early. So I commend you for that. As coach, how did that line come together for you between sports parent and, dad in the dugout?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I think it's really tough to not favor your kid in some regard. To be, obviously my goal was always to be objective. And I always tried to make sure that my other kids were getting similar chances to what my kids were. And just trying to give everyone an opportunity. I think one thing about all this is you learn as it goes along, and you look back on it and you say, well, maybe I could have done this a little better. And I think that's just a natural progress of life. And I guess I'm putting that energy into my columns. Like, for example, like we always stand there as the third base coach in baseball, correcting kids, do this, do that. But as we know, probably the less you say that's technical to a kid during a game, the better off you are, right? You don't want to be confusing them and bombarding them. And I always talk about in my columns about parents not saying anything to their kids except cheering while they're playing, because we don't want to confuse them and we want to give them autonomy. And I think that's really the most important thing, autonomy, and then also just opportunity. And that's one thing I try to do as a youth coach. I mean, no one was perfect with that, but especially when you're in events like Little League, it's just so important to give kids equal playing time. There'll be plenty of time for them to prove themselves as athletes later on, but we want to make sure that everyone is getting an equal opportunity to thrive and to build confidence, frankly, in themselves.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion. Quite frankly, I don't know if there's enough discussion about the kinds of sports parents that are on the sidelines, right? And I love to ask this question. I think I know the answer, by the way, but where do you, let's take the coach, Steve, out of the mix. You're now in the stands watching the boys. Where are you and your wife as sports parents? What category do you put yourself in as a sports parent?
Well, again, evolution, right? I mean, I think when I was younger, I was always coaching, and then I think the urge was always to try to help them, instruct them, like your parents. Like you still even do this when they're in high school, not necessarily with sports, but with, hey, did you do this homework? Can I help you with that? Can I reach out to this, parent for you or whatever, this coach for you, this college counselor for you, whatever, And it's the same kind of thing. Like you evolve and you realize, okay, the less I do for them during the game, number one, the better they're going to play. Number two, the better off they're going to be. So I think we've both learned to sit there, and I just sit there now. I mean, I just sit there and observe. I really do. Even when my son, either one of them is pitching in a high stakes game. We were in Atlanta this summer for a 17U tournament. He's pitching against a team with a bunch of D1 commits. I mean, I would just sit there and I just sat there and watched. I certainly didn't say anything to him. He had enough in his mind to try to get these hitters out, and one dad did notice behind me. He said, I noticed after the game, there were a couple of fist pumps there, that sort of thing. Not too loud, but just enough to kind of, okay, yeah, that's my kid out there. I'm pretty excited.
Yeah, I don't know if I shared this with you when we spoke, but as a sports parent, I learned pretty early on that I wanted to be the positive parent, not just to my kids, to all the kids, right? I wanted to make sure that, when they were coming off the field, highs, lows, everything, that, I was one of the positive parents, and there were a bunch of them. But the thing that I did is and this is what I don't know if I shared with you, but I took myself off the sidelines. So I was not on the sidelines with the parents. I was a shooter. I was a camera guy. And so I was shooting, and the camera gave me the freedom to go anywhere that I wanted as long as I kept my mouth quiet. And so it got me away from all that noise. It kept me from, saying anything, even in, the highest impact plays that, a parent might actually react to. One time I got in trouble in Chicago at an ECNL event. One time. And I was giving my daughter encouragement, sitting on the end line, which was stupid. And all of a sudden I look up through my lens and the referee's running towards me in my lens. And I'm like, oh my God, what's going on here? And she literally stopped the game and scolded me. And I thought, oh my God, I was so embarrassed. But anyway, So the freedom of that. Yeah. And so that's good. So talk about your culture. When I want to try to do, episode to episode, especially talking with parents and former youth athletes, is talk about the cultures that were in their house first. When you write, there are so many elements of putting culture together. And, culture of the organization that your kids are playing for, the culture of the coach and the team that they're on, and so on and so forth, and the parents that are on that team, right? But it starts with the culture at home. So for you and your wife, what was that culture strategy? Did you have a strategy? By the way, I didn't have a strategy that I could tell you. I wish I had one, actually. But what was that for you and your wife?
Well, I think the original strategy is just kind of to involve them in as many sports as possible that is manageable with your schedule, right? So I don't have to, I had a pretty flexible job even when I went into the office. I actually work exclusively from home now. So I had some pretty good flexibility in terms of getting coaching and getting my kids to practice and that sort of thing. So I think we tried to encourage, we try to get them to do a different sport every season. They were big baseball players. They would play baseball in the fall and the spring, and it would trickle over to the summer a little bit as they got older. And then they'd play basketball in the wintertime, maybe some flag football in the fall. So just try to introduce them to as much as possible, which I'm finding is really, really good because it kind of gives them autonomy. And I would try to say to myself, even though I'm a baseball guy, I'm fine if they want to be basketball players. I'm fine if they want to be lacrosse players. Let's see what they want to try, and let's go from there. And I think then you kind of try to balance. Now, I don't think it really had a strategy other than that, but I think then you try to balance. Okay, this is too much. We've had a couple of occasions where we've switched teams and switched organizations. Just to kind of try to find the best fit for them. But I think the biggest thing is just making sure that they're happy. Your life is balanced. It's not too crazy. And obviously when you get into high school, that their grades, make sure that their grades are where they need to be.
Yeah. Were those switches with clubs and coaches, without, naming anybody, were they culture fits and why you moved, or were they?
One of them was not a culture fit. So we decided that it was not the right fit. Other ones were just more, you want to be around kids that have similar goals to your kids when they get older. So you want to be in a situation where he's playing against the best competition that he can be playing against, and that's really where we're at. And as long as it's not too much for him, and that's kind of finding a balance, right? Not too hard, not too easy, competitive, where it's fun and competitive.
Yeah, and with this strategy, with them playing multi-sport, at what age did they go into, I don't like to call it specialized because I really don't want to see it as specialized, right? You write about that, and that's great, but I forget the way I phrased it. Anyway, the focus being on one sport, when did that shift for them? When were they moving away from multi-sport? Or did they play multi-sport all the way to the end in high school?
No, well, high school, I would say. Through 8th grade, they definitely played 2 sports. One of them played flag football. One of them played 3, baseball, basketball. They were their main sports, and then one of them played flag football. But I think you have to kind of, at a certain point, you have to kind of assess your goals. I think they were both good enough to try out and possibly make there was a freshman basketball team in our high school to do that. One of them, as I mentioned, went the football route. They had a freshman football team, which was a great experience because you're hitting other freshmen. You're not hitting, juniors and seniors, sophomores. And then, you just kind of decide on what they want. I think they both want to play baseball in college. So their travel organization has a fall and a spring, summer season. So I think in order to not miss out on that, they decided to just focus on the baseball. And in the winter, they wanted to, what we do in the winter is we work out a lot, do weightlifting, and do some light sort of arm care throwing kind of stuff to get them ready for baseball season. And that seems to be, once we hit high school, 9th, 10th grade, that seemed to be the best way for us.
And were these all natural transitions for you, or were you finding clubs and or coaches that were telling you, okay, now's the time, you either play with us or you're not going to be able to play maybe high school? I've heard this in Arizona a bunch from, high school coaches that are communicating this. Did you hear any of that along the way, or was it more, seamless transitions season to season and teams to teams?
I think we got pretty fortunate. We were always all in for baseball. So I think we always kind of tried to keep the baseball track and then mix in other sports where we could and take a season off. But I think, yeah, I don't think they were serious enough about other sports where it got to that point. I think a lot of families run into when your son is really, really good at a couple of sports, son or daughter, you have to realize that, and you have to kind of make a decision at a certain point if they want to play at the next level. Maybe they don't, though. I mean, maybe you play football and baseball, and that works out because there's a season in between to rest. It's just really what's best for the kid, I think.
Because your kids are older in this process, one of them's in college, right? You said early.
No, he's a senior.
He's a senior. He's going there. Okay. What have you found as far as going to that next level, and what you're hearing from coaches in the recruiting process, in the need process, what coaches are looking for? Have you heard any term of multi-sport athlete that they would prefer that? Has that come up in conversations? I mean, what are you hearing?
Absolutely. I think coaches love multi-sport athletes. I mean, at the end of the day, they want kids who are athletic, who aren't going to get hurt, and they want you to hit your metrics. I mean, a lot of, at least in terms of baseball, football, those are sports that have metrics. So, I think if you're doing that, you're playing multiple sports, it can really give you an advantage. But at the same time, I think you have to be able to manage that and make sure you're showcasing yourself, to the best of your abilities at your sport that you want to pursue. So that can be a very, very tough balance. And I think you just have to kind of be true to yourself and kind of figure out, like, okay, I'm really going to go for it with this sport. And I think one thing that I will mention about coaches that I've found is that, you go to these showcase camps. We've been to a bunch of them. They want to see, you're not going to play your best every single game. You just aren't, no matter what. You look at professional athletes, they certainly don't. They want to see how you handle failure. And that's really the most important thing. So I always try to tell my sons, okay, you're going to go out there in front of the coaches. It may not start out the way you want. You may load the bases, but they want to see how you respond in that situation. And that's really what's going to make you stick with them. They want kids who support their teammates and who handle failure well, because obviously we're both adults. Like, handling failure is like one of the number one skills you need in life, right?
Yeah. And on top of that, I think it's important to add, in a lot of cases at those showcases, they're not just looking on the field. They're looking on the sidelines. They're seeing what parents with kids are doing, and Is that something I want to inherit in my program? I mean, that's another important aspect that I don't think parents that are in it today understand, that they actually may have an impact on their kids down the road on a recruiting process with coaches, right?
Oh, absolutely. You are on camera from the second you walk in. And so it's funny you mention that. Whenever I take my sons to these things, they always say, Dad, don't walk to the sign-in table with me. I want to do it by myself. Like, they don't want to be labeled as the kid whose dad's tagging along with them. And, they want to be doing it on their own. And I think parents don't realize that. I think certainly if you give, I never bring a water bottle over the dugout or a snack and give it to my son. I have it with me. If he wants to come and get it from me, that's fine. I mean, these are things that, coaches do not generally, I think from my observations, they generally do not want to see. They want to see autonomous kids, especially when you get to the high school and college level. They do not want to see parents helping out.
Yeah. Well, listen, for parents that are listening right now, I hope you paid attention to this, because it's real. It's real. All right, let's shift into some of your articles, because I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up some of these. And like I said, we're just touching the tip of the iceberg here, but we'll see how many we can get through. The first one that I've highlighted was one you published on August 3rd of this year, titled, "Is It Worth It? Red Flags to Watch with Youth Sports Programs." And I got to tell you, this one, absolutely. And again, as a dad who I got no skin in the game other than being an advocate for sports parents and kids today. That's it. This one really touched home. So to just remind everybody, if you've read the article, these are the 8 red flags that Steve highlighted. 1, you don't feel like you have a say with anything. 2, you fear if you speak up, your kid will be penalized. 3, you fear if you leave, there will be no, quote, better option. 4, you feel pressured or outright told not to play other sports. 5, you're on a team with the primary of winning titles. 6, a team or a tournament requires you to stay at specific hotels with no flexibility. 7, the coach has a chummy relationship with a few of the other players' parents. And 8, you can't answer affirmatively, quote, "Is it worth it?" Steve, this was a great article. When you reported this story, which red flag stood out the most to you and was most surprising or troubling pattern across youth sports?
Well, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, this is sort of an offshoot of one of my colleagues actually did a very deep investigative piece about the Dallas Stars kind of controlling ice in North Texas and really requiring parents to pay fees and stay at specific hotels and really having control over kind of the say in these kids' like sports careers, and if you go somewhere else, or else, there was actually some threats involved. You go back and look at the story by Kenny Jacoby. But I think I'm not familiar with the stay to play formula as much as other people, but apparently that goes on a lot in soccer and volleyball.
Oh yeah, believe me, I can pick up for you on that end.
Yeah, that surprised me, because one benefit that I get from this is I like to get hotel points, right? So I try to use my hotel points to when I'm staying at these endless nights at hotels, right? So to force someone to stay somewhere, and pay a certain rate. When you're already shelling out all this money for your kids, I think that was kind of an eye opener. And I think just the one that a lot of people struggle with is the one with am I going to fall behind? Is there nowhere else for me to go? Sort of theme. And I think that's the one where you need to really have a conversation with your kid, and it kind of filters over to the other one, just having a conversation with the coach and saying, okay, like, what can I do to make this a better experience? Or what can we do to make this a better experience for my kid? And not being able to, not being afraid to have those conversations. And I think if there's a fear factor, which came out in this Dallas Stars investigation, then you're obviously in a bad situation. It's going to be, not only is it bad for your kid, but your kid's probably mental health is going to be compromised in that situation. Kids won't always tell you what's wrong, right? So I think you need to kind of have conversations with your kids, and you kind of have to look at the big picture and say, and as I said in the story, is this really worth it for our family and our overall health?
Yeah, and look, I want to touch on this for everybody listening, because as I really kind of rolled out what this idea of Valiant Sports Society was going to be, I was really playing around with the idea of putting fear in the title, because for me, fear was an emotion that came into play that I would have never in a million years thought was going to be taking over me. And it took over me. And so many of these 8 that you highlighted were things that, and you use the word fear in them. I mean, it was fear. And as you look at the screen, for those of you who might be watching on YouTube or somewhere else, Be Valiant, Play Fearless is the tagline of Valiant Sports. Be Valiant is for the parents. Play Fearless is for the kids. But really, I want the parents to make decisions fearlessly in order for that to happen. So if you're determined, if you're vigilant on getting the answers and being empowered as a parent, the hope is that the outcome is going to be that your kids are going to be able to play fearless. And hopefully you're going to be able to walk the journey fearlessly as well. And it's not the right way to go through this experience. And I can say firsthand, like it's not the way to go through this experience.
No, I mean, I think, I think there's a fine line with competition, right? I mean, I think fear of failure is not a great thing, but you want to have like a healthy, I don't know, nerves maybe, but like you don't want it to go too far, right? You want to like push through, and at the end of the day, whether you win or lose, you want your kid to be like, okay, I gave my best. I didn't win today, but I'm certainly going to try to win the next time I'm out there, that sort of thing. And that's healthy. And I think it's healthy for parents to have conversations with their kids about what they're doing and whether they like it or not. And I think too many of us, and I think we've all been guilty of this, want something really bad for our kid without really taking into consideration what your kid wants. And I've had to step back a number of times. In fact, my older son, who's still playing baseball, I think when he was 8 or 9, he actually said to me, "Dad, I don't like baseball as much as you do." So I had to kind of step away, and he kind of developed his own love of it, without me, because I was in danger of losing him, right? And now it's up to him. Like he's trying to play in college. He's a senior, and like I'm going to be supportive of him. I do what I can to help him, but I've really put the ball in his court. And I think that's the way. I feel like we've already almost accomplished our goal just by getting to this point.
Yeah, that's awesome. By the way, I took the step away. I think I mentioned this when we talked. As a former baseball player, I was really shocked by the idea that my baseball genes actually could be given to your kid. I may be overstating this, but my girls were able to throw a softball or a baseball or a football for that matter the way most guys would throw. They could catch, and they had great hand-eye coordination, and I could not get them to go play softball. My youngest decided one year to play in middle school, which was amazing, and I had to control my enthusiasm over it for sure. But that lasted for less than a year when she started hitting against the kids that were in the club, ecosystem, and they're spinning the ball on her, and she couldn't hit it. And I told her, I said, look, if we go to the cages within a month, I'll have you hitting balls over the fence, and you'll have so much fun you won't know what to do with yourself. But softball would never ended up being that route. So I'm happy that he came back to it and found not only your love, but found his love, because baseball is a great sport. Let's talk about one thing about this article, and you touched on it. It was really kind of shocking to me, especially where we sit today. And you didn't go deep into this, and I hope it's okay that I'm going to ask you this question this way. But we're looking at the youth sports industry now being over $40 billion in value. We're watching private equity money pour in, and it struck me that the Dallas Stars were doing some of the things that they were doing based on on the article that was written by your peer. It was amazing to me. And what scares me about that is how easily other professional sports franchises could actually fall into that realm and try to control, and I say this, control it with bias or unconscious bias or conscious bias. Like, they will try to control that ecosystem in their market if they realize it's another valuable revenue source for them to build their business on. Don't you think? I mean, this is really a scary point of this story that you wrote.
Yeah, I mean, this is just the beginning, probably, where the investigation to see if other teams are doing this. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think they run businesses, right? I think they want to develop fans of their teams. So there's definitely a fine line between developing fans of your team, which is a healthy thing, and kind of telling kids maybe that they're prospects when they're not, kind of giving kids a false sense of identity, by wearing their uniform and that sort of thing. I mean, I think we need to level with our kids about what this is all about. You hear great stories about, over the years of kids saying, going to a summer camp at a college, with a football team and a high profile football team and saying something like, a parent saying to the coach, you think my kid's a prospect, and the coach says, no, why not? Well, because he's 12, that sort of thing. Like, that's the kind of perspective we have to take. I think it's going to work itself out. I'm not 100% sold on if your kid is good enough, he'll be found, but you hear that a lot. My wife's a Dodger fan. I have the baseball package. So Oral Hershiser says it all the time on the broadcast. if your kid is good enough, he will be found, and I'd like to believe that. Like, certainly with a sport like metrics, like if you throw 95, you throw 95, right?
Yeah.
But I just think we need to keep in mind that most of us are not going to achieve that professional level. You or I didn't, it's just the way it goes, right? I mean, so I think we had to use sports, we certainly will try to reach our highest level, but I think we need to look at sports for the lessons that it provides and what it can do for us, holistically.
Yeah. By the way, I was supposed to have a tryout with the Dodgers via Tommy Lasorda. That's another story for another day, but we can have that story with your wife. It's interesting in the sense of it all that, where we're at with it. Let's just come back to the end of the article and really pull people into letting them read for themselves. But I think the basis of this one is, to really understand that you're not in it alone. These didn't come out of thin air, Steve. It's something that's been happening. But anyway, back to the pro sports thing. I'm a little concerned that, we could end up down a path where we see more Dallas Stars situation. I really hope that's not the case. I think we can see a little bit of it in soccer with MLS having its reach in on the youth level, and I saw a little bit of that. I don't know if the MLS team that was attached to the club here locally was really pulling strings, but again, at what point do they really kind of step in? All right, let's shift gears. The next article I want to cover was the one I've kind of touched on already with you interviewed Todd Frazier, which was a several-part series. You're not getting scouted at 12. Youth Sports Tips from Little League World Series Hero. This was published July 4th, 2025. And again, these articles can all be found at USA Today, and we also have a link on playfearless.org. The headline said it all. You're not getting scouted at 12. When you reported this, what was the core message you wanted parents to take away about early pressure and expectations?
Well, I just think in general, Little League baseball, if you watch the Little League World Series, I mean, I actually got a chance to cover it this year. So the kids are really having fun, but it is also, if you watch on TV, it is a lot of pressure on the kids, right? Playing on TV and having these broadcasters like Todd Frazier, analyze them. I mean, that's a lot, right? So I think going to Todd and asking him, about his experience and what that was like, I had the opportunity to do that. And his responses were really human and natural, which I really appreciated. Like, he basically said, okay, I was 12. I didn't realize what was going on. I didn't realize that, we were going to be national celebrities. I was meeting kids from other countries. He said he met some kids from all over the world, made good friends, and that's kind of the essence of sports, right? We're meeting friends, we're socializing, we're getting exercise. And so he didn't realize what was going on. He didn't realize what was at stake, and he just was out there, a kid playing baseball, and I think that's really the core message that Little League wants to get across, and I think that other youth sports organizations need to get across, is that we're out there. Number one thing is to compete and have fun and to learn lessons and to be with our friends, and obviously we can try to win and try really hard, but as I kind of alluded to earlier, like when you're 12, I mean, some of those Little League World Series players are talented and have gone into the big leagues, but when you're 12, that's not your primary concern, and no one's really looking at you as a pro prospect at that point, which is what I want to drive home in the article.
Yeah, and I love the quote that you put in there from him. It was, quote, "You're not getting scouted at 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. Man, not until you get to the big field," end quote. And for parents listening, and your kids are in this age group, let me emphasize this. Todd Frazier says, quote, "You're not getting scouted at 8, 9, 10, 11, or 12 years old, man. Not until you get to the big field," end quote. Get in it with reality. It doesn't happen in Little League. It doesn't happen on the small field. It doesn't happen in T-ball. Let them have fun. One of the things that, again, there's so many nuggets in these articles, but one of the things that really stood out to me is a subheadline. And he said, a good team begins and ends with good parents. And he talks about that Little League team in particular that won the World Series. And he credits that group of parents. Now, how often do you actually hear that? And can you get into a little bit of that and what he expressed to you about that whole experience with the parent group that was there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably an experience that a lot of Little League World Series parents go through. Like, I think you put your kid into the summer, if you're not familiar with how that works, it's a summer all-star program that Little Leagues have, and there's an American and a National League, and you compete to kind of separate the talent. And then you compete. You play districts, you play regionals, you play states first and then regionals. And then, if you get through all these games, you have a chance to get to the Little League World Series. So I think by the time you get to Williamsport, you are so amazed that you were there that, I mean, you're just kind of enjoying the experience and supporting your kids. I mean, you're kind of along for this ride. We've all experienced that when you're playing travel ball and, your team's doing well in a tournament, or you're just along for the ride with your friends. Like, it's just, you're on this kind of ride. And that's really the experience you want to give to your kids. And I think I saw some of that when I was in Williamsport. I mean, one of the coach of the Fairfield, Connecticut team, just sort of paused during a press conference and said, I can't believe we just made the American championship, that sort of thing. And those are the kind of people that are there and experiencing that. And these aren't the the parents that are riding their kids for the most part, is what I found. Like, that Fairfield team had a similar experience. Like, a grandfather who was traveling told me the same thing. These are parents that let their kids do their thing, and we're kind of along for the ride, and we cheer them. And that's really, what you want to give your kids. And I think hopefully there's some validation of that if you see the Toms River, New Jersey team, Todd Frazier doing that, and saying that the parents were just nothing but supportive.
Yeah, and the other thing I definitely wanted to touch on and get your thoughts, because we both traveled with our kids, right, for games, and I'm guilty of this, and I'm ashamed of it, to be honest with you. But you wrote in here, there was a paragraph. First and foremost, they were allowed to be kids. Think of those first road trips your child takes with a team. There are always a few parents who are sticklers about keeping the players away from pools and amusement parks that might tire them out or otherwise distract them from the, quote, reason they are on the trip. And I was guilty of that early on. And part of this was probably instilled by the coaches that were coaching my daughter or daughters. And here, what he's saying is, let the kids be kids. Let them have fun. Let them do and take in the environment that they're in beyond just the game on the field or the court or the ice or whatever it is.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of our first travel coaches said travel was not so much about going places, but about the journey that you're on. Right. So, like, when you go to these places, obviously, you need to use common sense. I mean, I think we were all guilty of some of that. Like, we got to rest for a game, but these are also kids pent up in a hotel room. Right. So they need to burn off some energy if they're not playing. So why not go to, again, we played at Hershey, Pennsylvania. Why not go to Hershey Park? Why not go to a movie? Why not let them swim in the pool? Obviously don't overtire them right before a game, but I think, it's just having an experience. It's just like when you all go out to dinner as a team. Don't stay out too late, but just enjoy the ride, because you're investing so much time and so much money in these experiences, and they really become certainly for us, they've become our summer vacations.
Yeah.
So you have so little time when the season's over before school starts these days to actually go on our quote unquote real vacation. So why not enjoy what you're doing while you're on these trips?
Well, and I think that's a huge point for parents that are in it today, and maybe even in the early stages of it. It's the playcation. I've said this on previous episodes. If you're not familiar with that term, get familiar with it. Playcation. It is not a vacation, according to the coaches of the organizations or the tournaments that you're going to be a part of, but it is a playcation. The reason it has still got part of the word vacation in it, and Steve, you can tell me what you think here as an English major from Georgetown. The playcation has still got a version of vacation inside of it, right? And we can't lose sight of that whole aspect of what kids are out there doing. The funny thing is my wife looks back and goes, oh, yeah, we never took any vacations. I said, oh, yes, we did. We took a lot of playcations. There's a lot of great photos from those memories.
Yeah. What I will say to those parents, and we've had these discussions. I think every family has these discussions about, okay, and some of the trips my wife hasn't gone on. She stayed home and worked, and I took my two sons and took a road trip, and we had a great time. But I think if you ask any of these parents who really have had a great experience with this, when it's gone, I think they look back and they say, boy, that was a lot of fun, you know,
Yeah.
and maybe as much fun as had they gone to Europe, one of those summers instead. I mean, there will be time, hopefully, to be able to do those sorts of things, and maybe you take those trips with your family when you're done with sports. But I think it's really a memorable experience that you really look back on. I mean, I'm already thinking about it with my 18-year-old. It's even if he plays in college, it's going to be different, right? It's
Yeah.
not going to be he and I in a hotel room, getting ready for the game, making sure he's got his water and hydrated, all meals, but it's going to be me watching him on a different team. So I think it's just these experiences you have with your kid are just invaluable, and you never really forget them.
Yeah. Listen, one of the things that I interviewed my daughters for Be Valiant separately, and they did have really good memories of those playcations. So, it was really good for me to hear what they had as their memories. And the playcations were definitely a part of it. And it wasn't about the tournaments. It was about where we went, what we did, around them. So very important for parents that are listening, very important to find the things around the sporting event to do family stuff with. All right, let's move on to another article. This one was published August 10th of 2025. Another recent one. This makes me laugh in the headline. The headline of this article was, quote, "Work of the Devil, ? End quote. Travel sports article. This was really eye-opening. Talk about this article just in general and the two that you interviewed for everybody listening. And it's another must-read, I think. But talk about this article.
Well, it's based on the author Michael Lewis, who wrote Moneyball and many other American sort of novels about not novels, but sort of stories about American narratives about culture, right, and observations of culture. And the other author was Richard Reeves, who's written a book about how males and boys are struggling in today's society. The kind of a crisis for males that we often don't think about, not just with sports, but with success, right? So I think I was out in California at the Project Play Summit, which is a great initiative to get more kids involved with sports, and they were able to attract some pretty famous names. So Michael Lewis gave a panel discussion about his experience with his daughters as a travel softball coach, and Richard Reeves kind of he was the one that gave me the devil line. Basically, took I'm from Great Britain and we don't have travel sports, and Saturdays are for the couch. So I kind of got their sort of dual perspectives. And interestingly enough, Michael Lewis had this experience with his daughter, and obviously he had means to fund it. But he wrote a book about it. And he talked about, I think it was more like a short audio book about just the experience and what it's like and his observations of how crazy we get about it. But ultimately it might work out for you or it might not. It's kind of up in the air, but sometimes it works out, and that's the thing you have to keep in perspective. It's good for some people, but not good for others.
Well, and I found it funny in the article too that when you were talking to Michael Lewis, he left an interview that he was doing with President Barack Obama because he had to get back to a softball tournament in time. I mean, there it says it all, that he had to get back for the softball game as opposed to talking to the president of the United States and continue the interview. You highlighted how the softball league was founded, the Berkeley local softball league. Talk about how, what lessons came from that experiment that was done, and maybe intro a little more of it, because for those who haven't read the article, talk about, what Michael Lewis was kind of touching on it, and do you think that model could work today?
Yeah. So basically, it was started by a professor at Cal, and the objective was to keep the parent interaction to a minimum. I mean, the goals are very, very admirable, right? I mean, keep the parent interaction to a minimum. The goal was for every team to sort of have a 500 record, so you didn't really keep score, but the kids kind of know what the score is. So you're trying to create an experience that's sort of educational for everybody and educational for the parents. Now, the problem that he ran into is, you throw them out into the real world, and it's like they're being thrown into the jungle, right? I think that's the way he put it, into the rainforest, right? You go out into this world, you form every league that has competitive kids and parents is going to form a travel team, right? And then they go out into the real world, quote unquote, and they're facing these teams that just want to destroy them, right? And so you end up losing, and my kids have had this experience, you end up losing a lot of games, and that's devastating for morale. So then you switch teams, and then it all begins, right? So that's really the struggle that we all deal with, is like, how do we manage like education with winning, and not like losing our sensibility, right? And I think that's the biggest thing. And I think for younger kids, I said it just a second ago, like, I think it works not keeping score, because kids keep score anyway, and they're competitive with each other, as long as we're sort of monitoring and teaching the life lessons. I think when they get to a certain age, they need a level of competition. And I think that just how we manage it and what's right for our kids.
Yeah. Again, another great article for those of you listening. We're just touching on it, but go find the link. Let's move on to another article. This is how I found you. It was posted or reposted, I think, on LinkedIn, where I found it. I read the article, and the way you covered this was about Annika Sorenstam, the Hall of Fame female golfer on the LPGA, and her as a sports parent. And I just thought, oh my gosh, you are hitting, once again, you're hitting on all the right things. And that's what really kind of forced me. I can't say it forced me. I'm like, I got to talk to this guy, like this for sure. This was a great article. What perspective from Annika Sorenstam stood out to you most as both a sports icon and as a parenting voice, and the approach that she took?
Well, I think her story is interesting, and similar to a lot of other pro athletes that I've spoken to, is that they do not put pressure on their kids, because they know how hard it is to get to where they achieve what they achieve. They generally had, like she had, a very positive experience. Her sister was a golfer too, but her parents were into skiing, and they sort of were along for the ride, and they pushed her. They didn't push her, but they maybe nudged her toward golf when they saw that golf was the sport that she was really good at, and what she liked to play. So I think that she's got a son who's I believe 11 or 12, and pretty talented, right? But she noted how her husband he was not a professional golfer, but is more competitive than she is about it, right? Because she knows, and she's just there to support him, right? And she doesn't throw him into situations where she feels like he can't handle it, right? She's in there sort of, she has the advantage of being able to play with him at these pro-am events and instruct him, and she gets very emotional out there playing with him, because she realizes how important it is to have that bond with your kid over sports, and to give them those lasting memories that they'll take, and not so much about having these angry conversations that, why didn't you do this, why did you do that? It's just going to lead to angst between the two of you, right? You're going to create moments when the less pressure you put on your kid, and let the kid be the one that builds the competitive juices and finds that for himself or herself. And I think that was a really important lesson from her.
Yeah, one of the quotes that you had in here from her that really stood out, again, for parents to consider, was, quote, "We practice a lot together," Sorenstam says, "but he's also kind of a student in the game. So about a year ago, I said, I think you need to find a real coach." And he was like, "Well, I want to work with you." And I said, Annika Sorenstam said, "That's fine, but then you have to listen." And then she said that really didn't work out very well, so he's working with somebody. But on top of that, what she says is, I don't coach him. I sometimes will go to those lessons just to hear what the coach is saying, not to correct him, and she certainly could, as Annika Sorenstam, but she goes to listen so she can stay consistent to what the coach is saying to him, and whenever that moment occurs, that she does have a voice, or he asks the question, I think is really more of where she leans into this, that she has the answer that's in line with what the coach is saying to her son.
Yeah, and that's an important lesson. I mean, I think if Annika Sorenstam can do that, then I think we can all, do that. Look, and I think there's situations where I'm sure she did a lot of research and found the right coach for her son, right? I mean, I think we need to find the right coach for our son or daughter who works with them the best and gets the most out of them. And I think she had a very valid point about, making sure that they listen, because, it's tough with being parents. And if you're the coach, I think most parents break away from their kids at a certain point and let them go, like I did. Just because you're not going to get the most out of them at a certain point. They're teenagers, and they push back at you, right? You need someone who's a different voice, and I think my sons have had kind of younger coaches that are cooler than me, so to speak, like they're in their 20s, and they relate to them. They can relate to them more about life than I can in a lot of ways. So I think that's just important. The player coach bond, and then not stepping in, maybe having conversations with your kid away from it if things aren't going the way that the kid wants, and maybe then setting up a parent meeting with the coach, but not interfering while the coach is actually doing coaching.
Yeah, and by the way, I'd be remiss. The title of this article was "Don't Be a Helicopter Parent." Don't be a helicopter parent. So there's a lot in there. Go find that one. There was another article I wanted to cover, but as we're getting towards the end here, was the article was most recent, August 30th. The title of this article was that fun? Coco Gauff's intense U.S. Open embodies what it means in sports. And just tell us really quickly, what this article meant to you, what you got out of it, and what sports parents should kind of take away.
Well, if anybody watched Coco Gauff play at the U.S. Open, she was eliminated on Sunday or Monday by Naomi Osaka, a very good player. But up until that, she had just switched coaches. She had a new serving coach, and she was working on her serve. And this is number 3 player in the world who just won the French Open and did not do well at Wimbledon. I believe she lost in the first round. So she switches coaches on the fly and getting all this criticism, frankly, from the media, out there on television. She goes out in front of the world and is working on a serve, and she's double faulting a lot. And she looks very distraught, right? She after her second match, which she pulled out, she's crying, right? But at the same time, like I spoke with a pretty notable professor at George Washington University who studies sports as a science. And she's done some really interesting studies. Her name is Amanda Visick, about what constitutes fun. And what she's determined by talking to kids from all ages, of all skill levels, male and female, is that fun is not something trivial that puts a smile on your face and you're out there like, let's have some fun after practice because we worked really hard. Fun is something that we go through, and there's all these different determinants, over 100 she found for tennis players. And part of that is getting feedback from your coach. You watched her with her new coach, Gavin McMillan, giving her lots of positive feedback, and her mom. She's 21, but her mother's still there giving her positive feedback at the matches, trying really hard, beating an opponent. One of the opponents she beat, she had lost to at the Olympics, and overcoming an obstacle, beating an opponent you've lost to previously. These are things, that constitute fun, being with your friends, learning a new skill, hitting the ball where it just feels absolutely right. Like there's so many determinants, like these kids that she interviewed, that she surveyed, came up with answers as to what constitutes fun. And then she started to group them, and she found that a lot of them were similar, right? That make up fun. So fun is like a holistic experience that you have to have through sports. It's not just something that's trivial. And, I think when Coco came through that match, and it was mentally excruciating, but she got through it. And by the end, she was having fun because she had made it, and she had overcome some stuff that maybe she thought she couldn't have overcome. And that's what sports can teach us.
Yeah, and this list is fantastic. What she found in her surveys. I would almost go as far as to say these are what happy moments are, and defining them a different way. I think it's Positive Coaching Alliance that preaches, happy moments, the happy moment bucket. And that's what a lot of these are. These are things that you may not consider as a sports parent, that when they happen, what they actually mean. But these are surveys that came from athletes of what their number one thing is about fun, or put them into another category, happy moments that they get from playing sports. So I would encourage you to find this list, and we'll post it on playfearless.org. All right. Well, we're getting near the end, so let's go back into reflections and takeaways here. And let me ask you, if you were to write a top 3 lessons article about your own journey as a dad in youth sports, what would make that list?
No one's perfect, right? As a parent, I think you're constantly learning. It's a constant evolution. You never perfect it, but I think you're always trying to perfect it. You're always trying to be good at it. So that's what makes it fun. That's how you get the most out of it. Yeah.
When your boys look back on these years of baseball and the other sports, for that matter, what do you hope they remember most?
I think the time that we spent together. I think in line with the competition that they had and the fun that they had out on the field. I hope that it's not just we won that tournament, we lost that tournament, and I don't think it's going to be that. I think it's going to be more just, hey, that was a great way to spend with my mom and dad, and for us to take a vacation, and for me to be out there on the field, trying my hardest and competing against, really good players.
Yeah. And then finally, what's your biggest piece of advice for parents who are just starting this youth sports journey with their kids?
Relax. I think that's probably the number one word, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we're all out there, and I remember sending out those first emails and people sending you emails back about how's practice going to work, and what should I bring, and my son's never played before, like what should I do? Just relax, let them go out there and let them enjoy themselves, and just see where it takes you. Maybe they don't, maybe they go into acting, maybe they play a musical instrument. Like, it just expose them to a lot of different things, and don't worry so much about the results, like when they're really young.
Yeah. There's one baseball guy to another baseball guy. I got to ask you, what's the game of catch like been for you in your household? And are you still doing it?
Well, what's great is that I have two boys, so they remind each other, and they go out and they throw with each other every day, which is fantastic. It's gotten a lot more difficult for me. I like to find a turf field where I can bounce the ball to them, because they throw it so far these days. But it was fun. Obviously, I loved it when they were young, and it's sort of a great bonding experience.
And I would assume that's what they're going to remember most, is playing catch with dad.
For sure. And you can still remember that first couple times you go out there with them, and they're just really struggling, and you're teaching them. Those are just kind of priceless moments that you won't forget.
Yeah. Well, awesome. All right. Well, we're at the end. So we're at a section that we like to call rapid fire, Steve. So are you ready for rapid fire? You can do one word or real quick. So here we go. What is the one thing you would change that most parents go through in youth sports?
Probably the cost, if I could.
Okay. What's the one thing you would change that most kids go through?
The pressure they place on themselves.
Okay. Worst story you've covered in youth sports?
Probably just the abuse that parents and put upon referees and sports officials, and just the pressure that they put on their kids. That's kind of a number of stories I've done, but just kind of the ways that parents can negatively affect the game.
Yeah. And by the way, we might have to do a separate podcast on that if I can have you back, because that is a big one. Best story you covered in youth sports?
There's been so many of them, it's hard to narrow those down. But I think maybe I recently did one about a little league dad who's his son's coach, who gave him a kidney transplant, and them kind of bonding together over that, and then getting back on the field together. That was very heartwarming. I did that one for Father's Day.
Oh, that's cool. What's the title of it?
I don't remember the exact title, but it was basically like, Father's Day. Father's Day came early for this dad and his son.
All right, we'll find it. We'll post it. I'll make sure that it gets out there. And finally, what does Be Valiant as a sports parent mean to you?
I think we kind of talked about this, just kind of not being afraid to make the decision that's best in the best interest of your kid, and not falling in line with what everyone else is doing and what the pressure is, and whether we're falling behind. Like, really make the decision based on the best interest of your kid.
All right. Well, we did it, Steve. I can't thank you enough, buddy. And I hope this relationship continues long into the future, because I think this is a battle where great voices need to be amplified, and you've certainly got a great voice, and maybe it's a great pen that goes with that voice. But I really want to do whatever I can to make sure parents can read those articles and hear that voice, because I think it's really critical, the things that you're covering and how you're covering it. So I can't thank you enough for spending time with us on Be Valiant, and I hope that we have you back again soon.
Thanks, Todd, and keep up your good work as well.
Thank you very much. So if you found value in this conversation, be sure to share it with another parent, an athlete, or even a coach. And to find all of Steve's great articles, you can go to USA Today and search Steve Borelli, or you can find links on our site at www.playfearless.org. And finally, for all the parents that are in the thick of it or just starting out, remember, you're allowed to make bold, informed decisions for your child. You're allowed to walk away from the wrong team. You're allowed to demand a better culture. But most of all, you're allowed to trust your gut and lead your family the way that's right for you, and especially your kids. Until next time, be valiant, play fearless.